Today's video contains 3 vastly different yet terrifying stories. From a cabin in the woods to some strange happenings across the street. These stories are scary in their own unique ways. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description, for allowing me to share these stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I remember the drive-in, the smell of the pines waning, the deeper we traveled down the dirt road. How the trees seemed to grow, not bigger but deeper. Dense, while at the same time dying. I remember the look on her face when she glanced at me, a sense of happiness between us, soon fleeting, for we knew not what was waiting us down this road, and into the woods. I write this now in the hopes that others don't make the same mistake we did, if it was a mistake at all. Or was it fate that led us on this trip? Were we supposed to always end up here? I find myself questioning it now. Whether or not God or the devil exist, all I know is what happened out here is not easily explained, but I am willing to try, for her. We were headed to a cabin, owned by my uncle and in my family for generations. Took a long weekend and a road trip to relax and enjoy each other's company. I explained to her that as a child, I would come here with my whole family. We would barbecue, fish, hunt, and sometimes just party, until my uncle got sick 10 years ago. It was sudden, and it was brutal. The doctors did not even have an explanation. The only thing any of us could think of was that it had something to do with the death of my cousin, his daughter. A few days before we realized my uncle was sick, we had found out about her murder. She was found on the side of a highway, just left there in a box. Her eyes missing, her heart torn out. My uncle was never the same up until his death. I remember seeing the color drain from his body, his normally rosy cheeks turning to ashen gray. You could see the death in his eyes. He stopped speaking, he stopped eating. He became a husk of himself until he eventually expired. The last time I was here was 10 years ago. The colors used to be vibrant. The birds chirping and animals scurrying through the forest. None of that was here now. It was as if the woods had died with my uncle. As it got darker, the road got bumpier. She wanted to stop and ask for directions at the last gas station we had passed, but I insisted that I could remember the way. We should have just turned back, or at least called it a night and shacked up at a seedy motel. But the nostalgia of that cabin was calling to me. It was a voice in my head, luring me with its siren song. Suddenly there was a pop, a flat tire. The only light on the road was the moon now, and the fog was rolling in. As I searched desperately for the tire jack in the trunk, she pointed out that the spare was just as flat. It was in that moment that we saw it. A flickering light in the distance, perhaps a half-mile into the woods, maybe farther. I remembered that my aunt had been up here to tidy the cabin a few days ago, ahead of our arrival. Maybe she had left the porch light on for us since we were coming in late, though I was certain that the cabin was on the opposite side of the road. We should not have followed that light. We gathered some equipment from the trunk, a flashlight, a lighter, our bags, and set off into the trees. The flickering light guiding us through, like a dying star. Slowly fading. Alone in a vast galaxy, as were we, alone but for each other, in this dense abyss of what was once a luscious forest. She had no fear. That's maybe what I loved the most about her. Plunging headfirst into the bramble, she was adventurous and kept me seeking thrills, as long as she was there beside me. She was my heroine, slowly working her magic through the bloodstream, rushing. I was addicted to her. However, at this moment, I felt nothing but fear. A sobering feeling. An eerie dread crept up my spine and planted itself into my brain from the moment we stepped into the woods, and I did not know why. It was there, though. It was real. I could not escape it. Panic set in on those initial steps, but when I looked at her and saw her trudging ahead, with nerves of steel, it calmed me for a few minutes. At least until the moans began. She heard them too. Our pace picked up, yet the flickering lights seemed to never get closer. We had been trekking along for what seemed like hours, the trees quickly engulfing our surroundings. Another moan, this time louder and closer. It sounded like a dying animal, yet somewhat human. What was left of the leaves on the dying trees began to crumble and fall onto us, but there was no wind. Just eerie calm, like a storm was ravaging the forest, but no rain or gusts to be found. We said nothing of the moans to each other. Maybe she was waiting for me to say something. Maybe they were just in my head. Or was she trying to remain calm for the both of us? We traveled on a while longer, until we finally hit a fence. I remember building this fence with my father and uncle when I was young. It still had the half-sunk nail in one of the poles that I had left there as a childish prank, but the initials I had carved into it were not there. As we climbed over the fence, the flickering light flashed for the last time. No matter, we had arrived here at last, physically unscathed, if not mentally panicked. I marched towards the thick wooden door on the porch of the cabin. The key, oh no, I left it in the car. As much as I dreaded heading back into those woods, I had to. She planned on staying there to search the shed for light bulbs for the dead porch light, and matches to try and start the fire pit up to make it easier to see. I set off back into the woods with my flashlight, but about 20 yards in it went out. The moans I had heard earlier were nowhere to be found, but that sense of dread was still there, needling at the back of my brain. The moon at least gave me better lighting than the walk-in, as the fog had subsided for now. I pulled out my phone for a little extra light. At least I could see what was in front of me. Finally, I made it to the car, opened the trunk, and retrieved the cabin key. As I shut the trunk, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the direction of the cabin, and I set off in a sprint to find her. Did she see a bear? A wolf? Or was it something more sinister? Something connected to my eerie sensations. I called out her name. Nothing. Again, I yelled for her. Nothing. Something was not right. I ran full speed, dodging branches and roots. I tripped over a large root jutting out, cracking my head and slicing my arm. As I lost consciousness, I heard the moans again. It felt like they were calling my name. Suddenly, I became aware. I was back at the fence. My head was pounding, my arm a bloody mess. But there she was, still standing near the shed where I had left her. I ran up to her, my breath short, my voice shaking, and asked her if she was alright. She said she never left the shed. She had a blank stare, like something was missing. It wasn't like her to be so dull, so uninterested. I told her about the scream that I had heard, and how I fell on the way back. She never heard a scream, and was unconcerned about my injuries. She just kept staring, deep into the heart of the woods. Maybe this was all in my head. Maybe the woods were playing a trick. My uncle used to tell my brother and I a campfire story somewhat similar. How the keepers of the forest would trick unwanted visitors, make them see things, hear things, take away their mind, strip them of their emotions, until they belonged to the forest, like a vampire's thrall. But that was just a campfire story, to scare children from running off into the woods at night. I had to get these thoughts out of my head. I needed to open up the cabin. I needed rest. I unlocked the door and walked in. It did appear as if my aunt was here, Everything was tidy and clean. I could stop worrying now. We could finally rest for the night. Not think about things in the woods that may or may not be imagined. I told her to come on inside, but she was still staring out into the dark. I ran my hand through her hair, pleaded with her to come. She wanted to start a fire. I should have made her come inside, but I knew that when she was determined to do something, that nothing could stop her. I hate myself for not noticing she was in pain in that moment. I should have seen that she wasn't herself. I knew something was wrong with her, but I could do nothing about it. All I could think about in that moment was getting back inside the cabin. I was being drawn to it, pulled. I was in the basement now. I do not know how I got there. Just like I don't know how I ended up back at the fence. One of the many empty spaces in my memory from that night. I'm not even sure it was just one night anymore. Time became irrelevant. All I could focus on was the item that was now present in my hands. I must have picked it up in the basement. A small lockbox covered in rust and dirt. The keyhole seemed to shift into different shapes. Shapes I could not put a name to. Or were they symbols? My hand was reaching for the cabin key in my pocket. I couldn't control myself. I heard a faint whisper coming from inside of the box, like the ones I heard in the woods, calling my name again. I dropped it on the ground. I ran outside to find her, to tell her we're getting out of here, and not looking back. I turned toward the shed, and that's when I saw it. The forest was warping around the cabin, as if it was alive, moving, dead trees rotating. There she stood, still fixated on whatever this thing was. It was floating there. Its body looked like an elongated stump, freshly plucked out of the ground. Dirt fell from its moss-covered branch-like arms. If it had a face, it was concealed under a hood of dead leaves. But all that was there was an endless void where a face should have been. I could not look away. I stood there frozen, just like her. She must have seen it when we first arrived, trapped in its gaze. I tried to reach for her, but it turned towards me, rotating its twig fingers in a circular motion at me. I began to walk back to the cabin, though I wasn't controlling myself. I was back in the basement, the creature breathing down my neck. It reached its hands towards my face and pointed for me to walk deeper into the basement, towards a coffin that was now resting beside two lit candles. As I approached the coffin, my arms went to open it. I tried to stop. I tried to regain control, but I couldn't. I opened the coffin, half expecting to be pushed into it. But what I saw was more horrific. It was me. My eyes gashed out, my chest ripped open where my heart should be, viscera everywhere. There was no denying that this was my body, ravaged most likely by this creature. Was this my future? The creature pointed again, this time to a diary in the corner of the room, with my dead cousin's name on the front. I was back outside. Another blackout. The lockbox was still in my hands. The creature whispered in my ear, a language I did not understand. I opened the box. She vanished. She was gone. As I regained control of my body, I rushed back into the cabin on my own terms. I knew what I would find. I was right. Where I had seen my dead body, now lay hers. Her eyes gouged out, her chest ripped apart, her heart gone. My love. I did this to her. It should have been me. The diary was still in the corner. I opened it and began to read. It contained steps to some kind of ritual. My uncle and aunt's names were both mentioned several times, as well as my cousin's. I took it with me and headed back up the stairs, noticing the color in my hands beginning to fade. I walked back up into the cabin to let the creature take me as well, but it was gone, and it was suddenly daylight. As I went outside, I smelled fresh flowers. The trees were filled with green, vibrant leaves. The birds chirped merrily. Squirrels rustled through the forest bed, just like I remembered. I'm a city girl through and through. I was born and raised in the city. I have a nice apartment in a high-rise building, and I enjoy a freshly made cup of coffee each morning on my way to work. In short, I'm the stark opposite of my best friend. She's a real country girl, driving tractors, riding horses, cowgirl hats. We met by pure chance at a summer activity camp, and had been located just far enough outside the city for her to attend while still being close enough to it for my parents to send me there as well. We were placed in the same cabin together, and once everyone else had dropped out of the stay for various reasons, the two of us had bonded. Over the years we kept in contact, and I would drag her into the city to stay with me every few weeks. Occasionally, though, it would be my turn to go into the country to visit her. I secretly hated and loved it at the same time. The quiet beauty of it was breathtaking, but at the same time the lack of cell reception wasn't thrilling. Her home was an old farmhouse that had been in her family for generations, and was currently home to her small family of 4 and her mother. The house was well maintained, but obviously old. The window panels were a nice wooden finish, while the house was a soft eggshell. Inside was filled with old furniture. Most of it had some story of relation to one of her family members or another, and aged oil paintings adorn the walls. People always think that inner city dwellers are rich, but every time I saw my friend's house, I was reminded that the truly rich live on large amounts of land, in huge houses paid off generations before. They don't know the fear of losing their house, or land, because they own nothing on it. That is true wealth. Anyway, on this particular night, I was over for dinner, the best homemade cottage pie I'd ever experienced, and I had planned on staying the night as I always do. But my work had called me requesting that I come in early the next day, because of some emergency meeting, and that meant I wouldn't be able to stay the night. Now, our tradition when I came over was to watch a few movies, and have a couple of drinks. So having to go early meant that our tradition got cut to 1 drink and 1 movie. The movie we watched was pretty lame. It was about ghosts haunting a house, but still it got us talking about the history behind her home. She recounted to me that certain parts of her house were reported to have the ghosts of her past family haunting them, but that none of the ghosts were really malevolent or anything, so she wasn't scared. I, however, got a little spooked. Not because of the ghosts, but because when I went outside it was dark. Really dark. With no moon in the sky, the walk from her house to my car was slightly unnerving. She did walk me to the car and have the porch light on, but still, being so far out, knowing that the area around was just a dark endless expanse in all directions, put me on edge. In the city, streets are well lit, and you can see considerable distances even after the sun has gone down. Out there, however, anything could creep up on you. Or your house, and you wouldn't know. There were no close-in fences or nearby neighbors to keep you safe. And with the spotty reception, even if you called for help, and somehow managed to get through, you're so far out that it'd take too long for anyone to get to you. This meant that someone or something could attack you, and you'd be dead before you could even hear the sirens. So as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and then I sat a moment to let the engine heat up, as I said my final goodbye before heading off. Driving in the country is a different experience. The roads are just gravel, and the faster you go, the more dust you make, and the more you flick up stones to scratch the paint of your car. Which is why I tend to take my time until I get back to the sealed road. So there is no point in rushing. And I don't know what it was about this night that made watching the headlights light up the road ahead feel creepy to me. Granted, the trees were all thrashing around in the wind, but it wasn't raining and it wasn't exactly hurricane force winds either, so there was no real cause for alarm. Still, I kept a keen focus on the road. I'd heard that sometimes branches get blown onto the road, and if I didn't want the paint getting scratched by rocks, I most certainly did not want a full branch dropping on me. That's when I started to feel real uneasy. I kept getting that feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. As I drove, I considered that maybe someone had stowed away in the back of my car. Well, it was parked unprotected. I dismissed that idea since my car was locked, though I still couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror, every now and then just to check the back of the car. It didn't really help much though, because I just ended up scaring myself more and convincing myself that I wasn't looking properly, because my nervous glances were so quick. But when I kept seeing nothing, I tried to ignore the tingling feeling down my spine, and resisted the urge to look back. However, it was in focusing forward that I saw it. Something far ahead seemed to be in the middle of the road. I started to slow my car, as I tried to figure out what it was that I was seeing. It was, as far as I could tell, a tall, dark shape in the middle of the road, but I couldn't see the top of it just yet because it seemed to disappear into the trees. I felt a sense of dread settling into my bones, as I slowly realized the thing I could see was only a small piece of the whole creature. With my headlights lighting up the road ahead, and my being closer, I could see that the figure was in fact a leg. The leg of a Goliath being standing before me, with its enormous mass fading into the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I stopped the car right there and just watched as it slowly moved to step across the landscape. It wasn't in sight for very long as it lumbered on its way, and I didn't draw attention to myself. But I don't know what to make of this experience. Is that thing always out there? What would it have done if it noticed me? Did it notice me? I have to admit, I'm not adjusting well to working from home. The work can get boring and I don't always know how to fill the days. Our house is quiet, and I spend a lot of hours staring out the office windows while on the phone with clients. I don't blame my wife for insinuating I could be seeing things. I'm looking for excuses to move, she says. Brooke knows I've always resented this too big house that we bought before the housing bubble burst. She raises an eyebrow at my stories of strange goings-on in the McMansion across the streets. What could possibly explain the steady stream of people that go into that house, though? It's for sale, and I know what you might think. They've shown the house and had open houses. But this is a different crowd. The open house crowd is older and looked moneyed. These people are younger. They're all plain looking too, like they stepped out of a department store catalog. Are they trying to be stealthy? They file in during the day, during the hours when the rest of the neighborhood is at work. I think they're trying not to be seen, but not trying too hard. They come and come and come, but I never see them leave. That's the maddening part. My wife insists that they must leave through the back door. It's the only logical explanation. There's a wooded lot behind the house, but why would they go there? I tried finding answers a few weeks ago, when I saw a young guy walk up to the house. I called out to him, but he wouldn't acknowledge me. Privileged little snob. I followed him up to the house, intent on walking in. I tried the door, but it wouldn't open. I knocked and waited. I knocked again and tried the bell. No answer. I stepped aside and looked in through the windows. The blinds were askew, but I still couldn't see much inside. I didn't see anyone. Just an ordinary, if poorly staged, interior. I walked around to the back of the house. Why on earth were there 3 back doors? The developers that built our neighborhood were a twisted bunch. I tried the first door, the second, and then the third. All were locked. I knocked, but none were opened. I kicked the last one in frustration and walked home. I told my wife about trying to make it inside the house. "Oh Lord," she said. "You need to stop obsessing over this, I swear. You finally get an original idea, and it's a stupid conspiracy theory about the house across the street. You know, you quit your job to work from home so you can finally unwind some, and you've just found something else to fret over. Give it a rest. You need a hobby or something. Aren't you at least a little bit curious? I asked. She shrugged. Would you finally let go of this if I could prove there's nothing going on over there? I would. Well, did you look for a key anywhere when you were over there? I bet there's one under the mats. I had to admit I did not. Amateur hour over here. She laughed. I can't listen to you worry about this anymore. I'm going over there to prove this is all in your head. I hate how confident Brooke can be when she knows she's right. I wondered which back door she'd leave from when she came back out to prove me wrong. I watched her stomp across the street and up to the house. I was surprised to see the front door open before she had a chance to look under the mat for a key. I waited for her to come back out, but tried not to stare the whole time. I opened my laptop and looked at rentals on Craigslist. While searching, I came across an interesting advert. Amazing opportunity, now interviewing young adults, ages 18 to 24, for paid psychology experiment. Inquire at 305 Morning Glory Court. I finally knew what was drawing people to the house, but I still didn't know why. An hour later, Brooke hadn't returned, and I began to worry. I tried calling her, but got a message that her number wasn't in service. That was really odd. We're on the same phone plan. I hope nothing bad had happened. She was too loud to kidnap. Maybe she had found squatters and was telling them how stupid I am. No, surely it was something more sinister. I put my shoes back on and readied myself to go into the house. I wish I had Brooke's same fearless streak. I was surprised to find the front door unlocked this time. Good thinking on Brooke's part, I'm sure. I went inside and looked around. The inside of the house looked surprisingly like ours. It had tall vaulted ceilings, a dated mid-aughts color palette, and useless decorative columns. It was like a time capsule. "Brooke!" I called out. No reply. I wouldn't put it past her to hide and try to scare me. I walked around diligently checking every room and closet. When I came up empty, I found my way to the back doors. They were painted different colors and each had a number. 2010, 2012, and 2007. "Welcome," a voice called out behind me. I looked back to see a man in a sharp suit. He held a clipboard and wore a name tag, Sam. His smile seemed artificial. "Welcome to our exciting experiments. I hope you came prepared. We were asking for younger participants, but we're happy to have you. I'll have you check in, sign a waiver, and then we can get started." "What the hell is this?" I yelled. "Where's my wife?" "Ah, you must be the gentleman from across the street who watches us so intently. I think you will be most pleased with your experience. Where is Brooke? I don't have time for this." He smiled and motioned to the doors behind us. "Choose wisely and you will see." I could hear chatter behind one of the doors. 2007. It sounded like my wife, but I couldn't be sure. I called out to her, but didn't get an answer. I could barely hear a man and a woman in a loving conversation. There was some laughter punctuating the quiet talk. She hadn't spoken to me like that in years. I felt a quick rage, wondering who she was sweet-talking on the other side of the door. I stormed in. I'm back in 2007 again. Suddenly, I'm standing in the Neo-Tuscan kitchen at 302 Morning Glory Court, our future home. The house is almost complete. It smells of sawdust, wet paint, and new beginnings. Brooke is beaming from across the room, fresh out of college and newly married. She sees nothing but opportunity in this house. "It's big, but we'll grow into it," she says. She had been elated that the bank offered such a large loan on our starting salaries. We walked around and inspected the house. In the front is a dining room, small but with big windows facing across the street. "This would be a wonderful office for you," Brooke says, squeezing my hand lovingly. An odd sense of déjà vu overcomes me. Maybe the houses we've toured have started to blend together. I look across the street. The houses are pretty similar. What are your thoughts? The agent asks. It's beautiful, my wife replies. It looks even better than the pictures. Would you be prepared to make an offer today, as discussed earlier? I know the developers are motivated to sell and get the neighborhood filled up. Well, I am, my wife says and turns to me. What do you think, honey? I think we should keep looking.